Fighting unfair professors leads to college reform. A little background. After disappointing my parents in high school with dismal academic scores and a serious predilection for teenage rebellion, I ended up in a small-town college with a close-knit Christian community, pursuing a degree in media studies. It wasn't the best place I could be, but it was fair compromise between my father's demand that I learn a paying skill and my own yearnings for liberation. Very quickly into this graduation program, I realized it was a waste and college was going to be a massive bore. So I spent most of my time courting, gullible, women or smoking pot. I am the kind of straggler who puts in the bare minimum so as not to upset the balance of the universe, and thus I made it to my final year without much of a fuss. This is when two new characters entered my life. First was a new male professor, an external faculty, a scrawny, slimy fellow henceforth. He taught a major paper and was very well connected with the local church, which had a lot of say in the college administration. On Sundays, he moonlighted as pastor for a small branch of the big church. Scrawny, slimy fellow also had a reputation for acting fresh with boys. I laughed about it with my friends, until one day, scrawny, slimy fellow made a pass at me, and not a verbal one. I pushed him off me, told him I am not gay, reminded him he is a teacher, and asked him to get his act together. Now, I am not a homophobic, but at that point, young and freshly assaulted as I was, I remember using profanities that would count as homophobic or hurtful. I have nothing against gay people. Go Pride. Only for those I am sorry, not for what was to follow. Scrawny, slimy fellow backed off, told me he was sorry. He had misread the signs. I cooled off, told him there were no signs, apologized for my abuses, and that was that. Or so I thought. But more on that later. The second entry was a new lecturer, a garrulous young woman. Let's call her Rose. She was fresh out of university, had worked a few odd jobs, and had landed this lecturing gig through some connection in the church. She was from town, had studied in this college, and knew the dean of the department well. Rose and I got off on the wrong foot to start with, a debate on art going offhand, as I found her imagining Christian motifs and theology in Picasso. She put me down, I didn't mind. I wasn't too interested either, but just to spite her, I kept turning up essays rebutting her points, and she kept marking me with really harshly, supplementing the dismal marks with juicy opinions on what she thought of my intellect. It became a game between us. Now I would like to imagine Rose had a roving eye, as she seemed to favor the young, good-looking boys and really put down the girls in class. Except one. Jess had been a classmate of ours and she was a local, so she did not shack on campus and had kept a low profile. She did not shine, but she wasn't disliked either. Suddenly, after Rose's joining college, Jess started to shine in academics. Happens often when the teacher is right for the student. Rose marked her extremely highly for a few assignments, and this got a lot of nerds in class really jittery, who saw a new challenger in Jess for the crown of Nerd King Queen. Some of them even read the assignments that Jess has turned in and found them highly incoherent. Nothing explained the grades she was getting. This did not bother me, as grades and nerd drama was never my thing. But then, by a stroke of misfortune, one of our other professors, who taught us 2 other papers, met with an accident and was off action for almost 2 months. A temp was hard to find, and since most of her teaching workload in those 2 months was going to be practical-oriented, Rose very gallantly volunteered to fill in for her, which, it still fathoms me, she was allowed to. What it meant was that Rose was now grading our assignments and papers for 3 subjects, and suddenly Jess's fortunes really turned. From being a challenger to the crown, she became the nerd queen, with her cumulative grades putting her on top of the pile. Jess just smiled through it all, and made it out to be her hard work finally getting recognized. A small coterie started to gather around her. It still didn't bother me, my universe was still in balance. Then one day, one of our batchmates saw Rose and Jess hanging out after college. They were shopping in some mall. Said batchmate decided to lurk around and find out what was cooking. Imagine his surprise when he saw them walk out of the mall and take the taxi together. Imagine his greater surprise when he followed them to find out enter the same household. Picture the pure shock for the entire batch when a day later we were all told that Jess and Rose are sisters. Fucking blood sisters. Born of the same parents, all of them still living under the same roof. Somehow, both sisters had conveniently forgotten to bring it up around others when they were in college. They had pulled this subterfuge for about 4-5 months now. A bunch of nerds ganged up and approached the dean for our courses and brought her up to date to this scenario. Turns out Dean knew all along about them being siblings and had actually encouraged Rose and Jess not to talk about it, so as not to fan talks of conflicts of interest. And now she refused to believe that Rose was being partial to her sister. I think she didn't want to go the trouble of replacing Rose. The nerds were heartbroken, but I was still laughing. In Rose and Jess, I saw a kind of petty evilness that I could appreciate. Then, for one of the papers that Rose was covering, we were assigned a practical project that required teamwork. I was put in the group with a girl I fancied, and to impress her, for once, I threw my minimum effort policy out of the window. We worked on it together, and our young adult rom-com had just begun taking shape. By the time we submitted the project together, this girl and I were very much into each other. Then Rose walked in and took a shit on the project. She made it part of our game and added those choicest expletives in her remarks for both of us that she had so far reserved only for me. Needless to say, Jess got top marks with a shitty effort. It broke my girl's heart. She sobbed on my shoulder, my gallantry came into question, and I was finally ready to settle some scores with Rose. But nothing major, just a little sticking it to the man. As I have mentioned, this story is from 13 years ago. About then, the world was waking up to social media, and our college was not too far behind. In fact, our department had quite a chattery group on one such social media site. That does not exist anymore, but used to be named after a Middle Eastern Google engineer. Rose and Jess were not in the group, but some of the faculty were. I started writing and posting long satirical sketches of Rose that ridiculed her teaching abilities and poked at her extra love for baby sister. I was hoping to get some of the faculty to take notice, but mostly I just wanted to be a dick to the sisterhood. A few days in, the posts generated a lot of laughs amongst the students on the group, but the faculty stayed away. Not be discouraged, I wrote my worst stinker of a skit caricaturing Rose. Read it, I will be honest. I wasn't kind and didn't mince my words. It was a nasty piece of work, meant to hurt. I wrote it, posted it, gloated with a few buddies who commented and forgot all about it. Here, I need to pause in my narrative and tell you folks about another stroke of misfortune that befell me at this point. One fine lazy afternoon between classes, I had rolled myself a little doobie and smoked that thing in the college loo. As I stepped out, after washing my eyes, I found the familiar face of scrawny, slimy fellow grinning at me, with all the mischief and slime he could muster. The air around us reeked of weed, and scrawny, slimy fellow's grin grew broader. He told me what my options were. He could A, tell my parents, B, tell the college, C, tell the cops, or I could suck his dick and he would forget about it altogether. I thought he must be joking, but scrawny, slimy fellow held that stupid grin and slunk out of the loo, stoned and slightly scared, TBH. I had no intentions of getting anally raped by scrawny, slimy fellow for smoking pot, but I had no time to worry about that as I started getting frantic calls from batchmates. Rose and Jess had found out about the group and my posts. Jess has made a few crying calls to people, and Rose was livid. The group's moderator, one of our batchmates, panicked and deleted the entire thread. I was summoned by the dean for an emergency meeting. When I arrived in her room, Rose and Jess were already there, sobbing bucket loads, calling me names, and holding up printouts of my posts. I had come prepared for this and proceeded to decimate their complaint with a well-constructed and elaborate speech on how Rose's nepotism is severely bad for the institution and student morale, and that I was only questioning her actions. Satire was just my tool to do so. Well, you see, my well-thought-out arguments didn't appeal to the dean. She didn't even know what nepotism meant, and I had to explain the word to her. I am not making this up. This dean is now a local councilwoman. She told me that I had slandered Rose's good name and brought disrepute to the college with my actions. They would have to throw me out. This I was not expecting. I had thought my speech would do the trick. I panicked. After all the effort dawdling through this course, I needed the degree. Then, gathering my wits, I told the dean that my opinions weren't just mine alone. The nerds had brought it to her attention as well. The dean tried to play it down, saying the nerd issue had been dealt with, but I called BS on that. I demanded she involve my entire class to see whether they would back me up on this. Rose said they won't. Jess was sure too. The dean agreed, thinking this will sort the mess simply. No class would gang up against faculty. Like all bad managers, she did not realize that her stopgap quick fix solution would open a can of worms. I was playing a gamble. I had no idea what my class would say. Sure, some of them had laughed and commented on the posts, but would they really stand up for me? I had no idea I was even that liked. But I guess the class had enough of Rose. Or they just liked my satire. Bottom line is, when Dean assembled the class and called a vote on the matter, our entire class, apart from Jess, agreed that Rose was unfair and nepotistic. They backed me up. I had never been particularly attached to my class, except the girl. But now, I could kiss each of them. The dean had to agree that maybe, just maybe, Rose was unfit for the job. A departmental inquiry had to be instituted so that these charges could be heard. I wasn't going to be thrown out after all. Rose was not happy, and I think she went to church with it. For soon I found myself in front of the president of the college, along with Rose and the dean. Rose painted it to seem like I had turned the class against her, and I had inflicted psychological damage on Jess. The president consulted the dean, heard all that had happened, and decided to let the inquiry make up its own mind. At this point, I began to suspect the department inquiry was going to be heavily stacked against me. As an added bonus, the president decided that the college needed an internet communication policy, a protocol on what students and teachers can say or discuss about the college, and its functioning over social media and the internet. It was to include rules on how students and teachers interacted over the internet and recommend punishment for misdemeanors. This was still the nascent stages of social media, folks. Colleges didn't know what to do back then. Most of the college did not know about this internet code being formulated. I did, because the dean and Rose had both taken out time from their busy teaching schedules to inform me that as soon as this internet code had been formulated, I would be chucked out for my actions. My days in college were numbered. My girl cried more on my shoulder. I felt like a tragic hero, a champion of the people, who will take the fall for his brethren. My class mourned me. In this state of mind, I returned to my dorm to find an email from scrawny slimy fellow. He wanted to know what I had decided about his offer. In all this Rose social media fiasco, this shit had completely slipped my mind. I wanted to write back telling scrawny slimy fellow to fuck off. Now that I was getting chucked out, his threats didn't matter. But then something struck me. I started exchanging emails with scrawny slimy fellow and realized he had no idea about the Rose thing or the impending internet code. He was an external faculty. This was God sent. You see where all this is going now. Well, suffice to say that over the next couple of days, over a series of emails with scrawny slimy fellow, I discussed my apprehensions about the offer and my hesitations as I was not gay. I played the scared victim here and let him coax me into giving in to his demand. Honestly, I was just baiting him and waiting for the president's code to roll out. Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, our college unveiled its internet policy, banning social media for both students and teachers alike, and the usual set of guidelines to follow while interacting on the internet. By now, I had gathered enough dirt on scrawny, slimy fellow. So, when the president summoned me for a disciplinary hearing under the new internet code, I sat down and wrote the speech I was going to give to the president. My girl was in on this and she helped me with it. Once I was confident about what to say, I printed out the email exchange, neatly bounded it all together into one file, and headed to the president a little before the appointed hour. I met him and showed him the entire email exchange. I wanted to know how scrawny, slimy fellow's emails to me scored on this internet codebook. Would it look good if I had to drag the professor, a pastor at that, and the college to court for sexual harassment? What would a good Christian town say about that? That did the trick. His tone changed, he saw my angle in all of this, and promised action. I also told the president that the dean sucked at her job, which is why creep like scrawny, slimy fellow and nepotistic shits like Rose ran riot. Now I didn't want any of them, Rose, the dean, or scrawny, slimy fellow, to be able to screw my career. The president assured me that they won't be left capable to do that, but I had to keep my mouth shut about those emails. I took the deal. A week later, I signed a non-disclosure with the college, handed them all the printouts, and deleted my emails under their lawyer's supervision. Scrawny, slimy fellow's contract with the college was terminated, and he was expelled from his church. No one knew why. His life was destroyed. He hasn't had a job since, and last heard, he was living with and off his mother. The dean was let go, and she discovered a second career in politics and went on to become a councilwoman, which she still is. Rose was let go as well, while Jess finished college quietly without much fuss. Last heard, both sisters together run a store in town. I graduated with distinctions in all papers that Rose and scrawny, slimy fellow handled, thanks to the president's intervention, which put me pretty high on the merit list and made the nerds jealous. I don't know if this counts as pro-revenge, and I am sorry if I have wasted your time. I was just a pesky senior who screwed up, but got lucky when a professor hit on me. And yes, the college had a new internet usage policy,